Our next presenter is Maya Grace Misra, an artist and educator based in San Diego, California. Her artistic research and practice center around the role of cultural production, namely iconography and food media, in reinforcing dominant historical narratives. She earned her MFA in visual arts in UC San Diego, where she also worked as a writing instructor. Maya has been a NAVA member since 2016. There you go. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I will just get us started right away because we have a lot to talk about here today. So in this presentation, I explore how racialized othering becomes a compounding factor that can motivate U.S. flag usage among communities of color in the United States as part of an effort to protect against threats of physical and structural harm. Drawing on concepts from sociological and ethnic studies fields, as well as historical and vexillological sources, I will discuss how this pattern takes place, particularly when a racialized group's Americanness is called into question. This is not to say that communities of color do not hold allegiance or pride in belonging to the United States, but rather that this personal allegiance is often accompanied by what W.E.B. Du Bois referred to as a double consciousness of how one's body may be perceived by established in-group members of the nation. As such, these case studies that I will share momentarily consider the individual's decision to fly the United States flag as existing within a broader consciousness of visibility and surveillance, tools that have long been weaponized to control and oppress groups of people, yet which historically racialized groups have in turn repurposed to assert agency and pursue possibilities for survival. So to organize my research, I will share my findings from 3 historical moments. Firstly, protest-related use of the U.S. flag among Black Americans fighting for civil rights in the 1960s, rituals of engagement with the U.S. flag by Japanese and Japanese Americans prior to and during World War II incarceration, and display of the U.S. flag among Middle Eastern and South Asian community members following the September 11, 2001 World Trade Center attacks. Now, before I dive into these case studies, I want to first define some of the terms that I will be using, which are very common in ethnic studies and sociology discourses, but not so much in everyday conversations. In 1986, sociologists Michael Omi and Howard Winant developed their theory of racial formation, through which they coined the term racialization to describe how meaning is attached to new and existing categories of racial identity. These categories, which are socially constructed, are not real in a biological sense. However, by attaching meaning to them, racialization does serve to redistribute power and resources in very real, tangible ways. Othering is a process of assigning meaning to social groups so as to dehumanize them on the basis of perceived differences. So when I use the term racialized othering here, I am referring to othering specifically on the basis of race, marking a racial group as other through dehumanizing language policies and institutional measures. Now, I really wanted to take some time to talk about Steve Knowlton's work as an inspiration for my own, and I realized I will be short on time if I do that. So I'm actually going to skip to my next slide, but I would love to talk with folks more about that in the future. So the first case study that I will examine is that of U.S. flag usage among Black Americans fighting for civil rights. And I'll start out with a quote from Dr. Mary MacLeod Bethune from her remarks to a crowd of roughly 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden in 1942. As she spoke of many Black Americans' devotion to the United States, as well as a desire to find civil and legal protections under the flag without fear of racial violence. She says, "We want our flag to protect us at home in our right to produce and to live, abroad in our willingness to sacrifice and to die. Her statement suggests an awareness that the white American public, by and large, did not recognize Black Americans as being truly represented by the flag, as not being truly American. This conceptualization was reinforced structurally through the 1896 Separate but Equal doctrine that maintained strict racial segregation in public spaces as well as the home. For Bethune, the racialization of Black people as other in the white imagination was something that she could not pretend away. Sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois coined the term double consciousness to describe this experience of Black people moving through the world with a heightened awareness of how they are perceived by others. Maintaining such a painfully deep awareness of the dominant gaze, as Du Bois asserts, nonetheless comes with the ability to recognize how one's body is read and to use one's visibility to sway public perception. Such a concept is exemplified in this photograph captured by Bruce Davidson in Selma, Alabama in 1965. This young demonstrator has wrapped himself in the flag and stares intently at the viewer, his gaze fixed and astute, a demand to be recognized as American, to be held in the protections that the flag may offer. His awareness of the photographer with such a determined glance betrays his recognition of how he is perceived by the dominant gaze and how he might influence that representation through flag usage. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee leader Dory Ladner has offered chilling descriptions of the terror during the Civil Rights Movement, indicating how the Confederate battle flag signaled a heightened threat to the Black community's physical safety. Rosalind Urbach Moss's 1998 essay for Raven explores flag usage during this period. She points out that early use of the U.S. flag in protest by Black organizers was in direct response to the renewed usage of the Confederate battle flag by states' rights parties, the Ku Klux Klan, and pro-segregation hecklers. She details early instances of such visual arguments which took place spontaneously and locally at sit-in actions in cities such as Nashville, Richmond, and Greensboro, but expanded as the civil rights movement gained strength. In the second image by photographer Bruce Davidson, the dynamics of such visual arguments are clearly visible, as well as the U.S. flag as a symbol of protection. In the foreground on the left-hand side of the frame, marchers carry large flags of the United States and the United Nations as they travel along a road. Several feet beyond the road, on the right-hand side of the image, a man hoists the Confederate battle flag as he leans against a Volkswagen Beetle, emblazoned with the roughly painted words, "Go home, scum," across the hood of the car. Aware of the Confederate flag display that confronts the peaceful protest, Black marcher Lewis Marshall glances over as he holds up the American flag, presumably to assess the danger. In this momentary glimpse, the U.S. flag buckles in the breeze and blankets itself around Marshall's body, as though to clothe and protect him from the threats just beyond his path. Davidson's photograph begs the viewer to question the values and people that might be considered American. African Americans who used the U.S. flag as an explicitly patriotic symbol helped to convey the community's desire to assimilate into the existing social structures of the United States, which stood in stark contrast to segregationists whose flag usage suggested a desire to break away from those very structures. In this way, the camera and the flag together became essential tools for Black Americans fighting for civil rights to convey patriotic sentiments and to appeal to the larger public for structural protections. Urbach Moss also highlights a turning point at which Black organizers began to view the U.S. flag as a statement in and of itself, capable of expanding the United States flag's symbolic meaning towards a vision of the nation that would celebrate racial diversity and equality. This usage, as it was related to safety, was perhaps most notably demonstrated in the May 31st, 1963 Children's March in Jackson, for which organizers feared that children marchers might be arrested and or violently attacked by police, as those marching in Birmingham a few weeks prior had been. For this reason, they chose to wave U.S. flags instead of carrying picket signs. Organizer John Salter Gray later voiced their thinking that the flag seemed to serve, quote, almost as an icon or a religious symbol, which might provide protection in some mystical sense. As photographic and news media documentation of the civil rights movement continued, the images of these police responses to peacefully protesting, flag-wielding children had an increasingly resonant impact on the broader public's demands for civil rights protections for Black Americans. Even so, carrying the U.S. flag did not always secure physical safety for marchers. In the aforementioned 1963 march in Jackson, police violently ripped flags away from participants and arrested 600 children. A few months later, Dory Ladner described feeling that holding the U.S. flag might even bring more danger, given the climate surrounding organizers in the South and prior responses to Black Americans' use of the flag. Now I'll move on to my next case study, so to speak, which is looking at rituals of allegiance to the U.S. flag among Japanese and Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II. And I'm going to start out with this quote by Norman Mineta, who is a former cabinet member of 2 separate presidential administrations, as well as the former mayor of San Jose, California. And he was also incarcerated as a child at Heart Mountain Relocation Center. And he has said, quote, if you happen to catch me wearing a jacket these days, you'll see a pin of an American flag in my lapel. It's my way of reminding everyone I encounter that despite how they might judge me by my Japanese face, I am an American and a proud one at that. And what Mineta is speaking to here is his understanding and recognition of the way in which he has been racialized as a foreigner, as well as the action that he takes to try to push back against that racialization by taking up the US flag. Now, leading up to their incarceration, Japanese Americans were cast as criminals, aliens, and perpetual foreigners through both policy changes and media representations. Notably, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which enforced the incarceration of all people of Japanese ancestry and created the War Relocation Authority, which would facilitate that incarceration. These gestures all bore significant impacts on the community's safety in the face of racist vigilante violence. Cultural theorist Bill Ong-Hing has described the Japanese American community's resulting racialization as a process of de-Americanization, whereby they were, quote, forever regarded as immigrant America, as opposed to simply part of America and its diversity. Photographs shot by Dorothea Lange in the months leading up to the forced displacement and incarceration of Japanese Americans depict United States flags displayed on the walls of stores and worn as buttons on clothing. Her images also portray Japanese American school children as they engage in daily flag salutes. In the photograph on the left-hand side, a sprawling scene unfolds of customers shopping deals in a store operated by a Japanese American shopkeeper. Overseeing these activities is a large United States flag draped across one wall of the space. Its folds are still visible, not yet flattened from the weight and time of gravity's pull, suggesting that the flag has only recently been hung. Despite the fact that the proprietors of the store had to empty the space as quickly as possible to prepare for their displacement, they made it a point to put up the flag as wall decor, suggesting the need to display a symbol that they felt would protect them in the meantime. Japanese Americans made a distinct effort to be recognized as American to mitigate harm in the face of vigilante racism and to attempt to halt their de-Americanization in the public media. As previously mentioned, the War Relocation Authority was created to facilitate the removal and incarceration of all people of Japanese ancestry. But the agency also hired photographers, including Lange, to document these events. The goal was to control the visual narrative of the camps and to suggest that incarcerees were living happy, healthy lives. It should be noted that because Lange's images revealed the heartbreak and poor conditions that many experienced, her photographs were impounded by the federal government until the end of the war. The photographs are, however, currently, for the time being, available to view through the National Archives catalog, along with images from other WRA photographers. Among them are countless photos of flag raisings and salutes led by school children and Boy Scouts. While at first glance, these flag rituals seem like compulsory acts of unquestioned patriotism, they were in fact required rituals instituted in the camps through the Americanization program, which was implemented by WRA Director Dylan S. Meyer in 1943. His goal was to craft an image of Japanese Americans as loyal citizens, such that federally employed photographers might visually convince the larger public to allow for the reintegration of the community, a twofold strategy to source affordable labor from Japanese Americans while also reducing the significant expenses of running the camps. At the same time, the program emphasized American loyalty as the sole determining factor in whether Japanese Americans would be worthy of living a life of freedom beyond barbed wire fences. Many Japanese Americans have since spoken of their disillusionment with the contradictions of expressing American patriotism amidst incarceration, and others yet still felt deeply patriotic. Even so, many in the community understood that performing their loyalty for the dominant gaze was a crucial means of seeking freedom. For some individuals like Mineo Okubo, who was incarcerated at Topaz Relocation Center, singing God Bless America next to the flag could not be separated from her fear of retribution from camp administrators and staff, including armed guards constantly surveilling them. Those incarcerated in the camps were prohibited from owning or operating cameras, which were considered contraband. Despite few notable exceptions of people who smuggled in photographic equipment, by and large, incarcerees did not have the means to self-representation. Deeply aware of their surveillance, both through the panopticon-style camp watchtowers and the cameras of WRA photographers, engaging with the United States flag served as a meaningful tool to perform loyalty to the nation and control how they were represented. Although many Japanese Americans who were determined to be sufficiently loyal to the United States were eventually granted authority to take jobs in neighboring towns, they were still largely confined to living in the camps until the end of World War II. Upon their release, many experienced violent attacks from vigilante racists and/or returned to their homes and farms to find them vandalized or seized. In this way, using the flag as a form of protection and engaging with the flag in the camps had minimal impact on their hope of gaining safety, or their ability to gain safety, I should say. Now I'll be moving on to my final case study for this presentation, which is about U.S. flag usage among Middle Eastern and South Asian communities following the September 11, 2001 attacks. And it's important to note that some studies have been done that analyze flag display behaviors and impacts in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. A topic that was even discussed here at this conference yesterday at great length. Political psychologist Linda Skitka's 2005 paper analyzed whether patriotism or nationalism prompted American flag usage following 9/11, while sociologists Marcus Kemmelmeyer and David G. Winter assume in their 2008 study that patriotism was the motivating factor, but investigate whether such flag behaviors increased nationalism amongst a viewing public. Taken together, these studies all imagine post 9/11 flag waving as spurred by a fundamentally positive outlook on what it means to be American. But as the Punjabi American rapper Himanshu Suri, otherwise known as Heems, highlights in his 2015 song Flag Shopping, his experience of going shopping for the United States flag in this period cannot be separated from the sudden rise in hatred and violence toward his South Asian community. Hardly given the opportunity to process and grieve the falling of the Twin Towers, which Suri witnessed just blocks away from his own Manhattan high school. He and his family needed to take urgent action to mitigate the risk of being targeted by hate crimes, specifically by purchasing the US flag to display. The abundance of US flag usage among the broader South Asian American community is demonstrated in this captivating photograph by Corky Lee. The candlelight vigil represented here was organized by Sikh community members who hoped to bring New Yorkers together in mourning days after the attacks. The viewer's gaze drifts between the various subjects of the image, but repeatedly returns to the man in the foreground, whose engagement with the camera is magnetic and unwavering. His eyes appear sleepless, but remain assertively fixated on the camera. Deeply aware of the gaze of the camera, his expression suggests a plea to be protected as a loyal American. Just as Ong Hing described the de-Americanization of Japanese Americans in the early 1940s, he has also discussed the same process through which Muslim, South Asian, and Middle Eastern communities were de-Americanized following 9/11, which had a significant impact on individuals' use of the flag to cover stigmatized characteristics. As a research participant named Rahul stated from a 2007 study, quote, "I was careful how I dressed. I probably wore my American flag around a few times just to let people know I wasn't one of the quote unquote enemy. I sent emails to some of my friends letting them know that you should just be careful about going to certain places, like dressing in ethnic attire and keeping a low profile and things like that." Rahul here directly connects his flag display behaviors with the self-aware anxiety around being racialized as a perpetual foreigner. In addition to his song Flag Shopping, Heems has similarly discussed the implications of this relationship between fear and flag usage on a community-wide scale. He says, quote, "After 9/11, things felt kind of unsafe for the brown community. We immediately went to buy these bumper stickers to put on our car, these flags to hang in our windows, so our neighbors, who we had lived with for 20 years, knew that we were American and that we were proud to be American, that we did not support terrorism." Perhaps most interesting about this case study to me is how it reveals the importance of gender and socioeconomic status alongside racialization in impacting flag display behaviors. Luis Kenkar has pointed out that Muslim women in hijab bought flags for their cars, which was perceived to enhance their safety. Other scholars have discussed how lower income South Asian and Middle Eastern people often held jobs that necessitated regular interaction with the public, bringing a greater level of vulnerability and therefore necessitating US flag display. As filmmaker Vivek Bald has stated, it was the most vulnerable who had them first: taxi drivers and street vendors, gas station, convenience store, and corner store workers, those who, in order to support their families, to make their living, had to come into the contact with the public, who had to do so alone and could not afford to take a day off. Sociology professor Tassim Shams describes these flag-related covering behaviors as part of a larger set of self-policing symbols and discursive strategies indicative of Muslim Americans' self-discipline to become, or at least appear to be, patriotic. But as she argues, these behaviors did not simply occur on their own. Rather, they emerged from an increase in state surveillance technologies following 9/11 that directly targeted the community, fostering their hyper-awareness of being perceived as, quote, the enemy within, and, quote, anti-American, not unlike responses to the camera in earlier case studies. As such, Muslim Americans found ways of confronting their surveillance with the understanding that in response to their racialization as other, one's visibility can be managed to resist an unwanted way of being seen or an imposed identity category. Draping oneself in the flag, then, is a purposeful and conscious effort to shift one's representation in the public sphere and to ensure one's physical safety in the face of harmful racializations. Now, just to conclude, I believe I might be slightly over time. Apologies. So I want to just share the sort of take-home themes here and patterns, which is this matter of double consciousness, this perception of how one's body is read, and how we find individuals taking up the United States flag to assert an American identity, particularly when faced with a historic or ongoing process of racialization that has dehumanized them and their community. Vivek Bald has also spoken of flag usage being ineffective in this way. He says, I hope that 20 years on, we've learned that the flag is not, in fact, a protective cloak, that we were never shielded when, out of faith or fear, we wrapped ourselves in its folds to prove our loyalty, doubled down on the American dream to prove our resilience, or performed as the model minority to prove our worth. His words emphasize the inadequacy of the flag in fully protecting people of color when used as protective gear, while demonstrating that the burden of proof should never have to rest on the shoulders of communities racialized as other. So where do we go from here? I have some thoughts about this, but for one thing, I believe that we should analyze and use an intersectional analysis of flag display behaviors, thinking of social positionality and aspects of identity and how those can impact people's usage of flags, as well as asking complicating questions upon the site of a U.S. flag display. So in what context does this flag display exist? And what might this flag display tell me about existing structural threats to the physical and political safety of a community? Applying an intersectional approach to analysis of flag display behaviors is crucial in better recognizing social experiences of systemic harm, encouraging a collective responsibility to protect the communities around us so that they need not turn solely to the flag to seek safety. Thank you.
So that was great. Thank you so much. It's worth noting that, at least at its best, the largest society has sometimes understood the complexities of the flag. For a long time, the flag salute began this way: I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which during the Second World War was one of the factors, sort of one of the sort of underlying pieces of the culture that led the Supreme Court to affirm the right of Jehovah's Witnesses not to pledge to the flag in 1943. And Justice Jackson, who is probably the best author on the court ever, has this language about if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that there's no orthodoxy. And clearly he was sophisticated enough, though he wasn't explicit about it, to have the flag in mind when he said that. Said, while minority groups will often use the flag as their effort to defend themselves, even the larger society, I think, at its best, realizes that it's a complicated and ambivalent symbol.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sort of adding on to that as well, I think there was a complexity in the immediacy of 9/11. As I said yesterday, I think in some ways it was a very unifying reaction to a horrific event that broached the gap that happened with the presidential election in 2000. But it also depends on the communities, because in some communities it was very unifying, but you're absolutely right. In other communities, it was a real flashpoint in and of itself. I also have a question, powerfully, very poignant and really probing presentation. I'd be really interested in knowing, I know the 442nd Battalion, Nizai, I think the highest decorated American unit in World War II in Europe. Japanese Americans fought. My question is, how did their families who were in internment camps, how did they deal with the fact that their son is fighting for this country in combat, much decorated unit? Did they feel like they could have the flag in honor of their son, or how did they deal with this dichotomy?
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, it varied, obviously, depending on the family. For the most part, it was very supportive. They would use the flag quite a bit. And I know that a lot of family members of people who were not incarcerated, but instead were sent to war, would start letter writing campaigns to support their siblings and their community members in fighting for the war. In terms of flag usage, I didn't study that in particular so deeply, of like what it was like for community members whose family was drafted or was fighting in World War II, I should say. But my understanding generally was that it was very, very positive in terms of using the flag and conveying American patriotism. Because at the end of the day, that is why people enlisted, right? Is regardless of their feelings of discomfort of being racialized in a particular way, they wanted to prove their loyalty, and that was one way of doing it. And so I think their families were supportive in that way. Thank you for that question.